Good afternoon, everyone. On the occasion of the May 1st, I would like to address a few points about the situation of the Iranian economy and the situation of Iranian workers and laborers. It's almost 2 years since Hassan Rouhani became the president of this regime. And as we all remember, the key issue that he promised to focus on was to improve the welfare and the situation of the Iranian workers. Now the issue is, has there been any improvement, and has he basically been able to deliver? I think all the facts point out quite to the contrary, that the situation and the condition of the Iranian workers and the Iranian economy not only improved, but rather has deteriorated, and has deteriorated rather dramatically and very quickly. According to the regime's own statistics, now 90% of the Iranian population live below the poverty line, and the other 10% are very quickly joining the others. Actually, according to some estimates, only 1% of the Iranian society now enjoys an unbelievable amount of wealth and capital, and which is the result of plundering and corruption, and the others are basically struggling very hard to survive. According to the Speaker of the Parliament, Ali Larijani, just a few days ago, 42% of university graduates are now unemployed in Iran, and that speaks volumes about the overall economic situation and the welfare of the people. Actually, in a study of the last 10 years, since 2005, the workers have lost 73% of their purchasing power. So, and that is getting worse as time goes by. And naturally, Rouhani has not done anything to improve this. Rather, he is simply continuing the same path and making things much worse for the Iranian laborers and workers. One gambit that the regime has used against the Iranian workers and laborers is that instead of even those who are employed being given full-time employment so they can enjoy the least social security or health insurance and things like this, the contracts are becoming short-term, month by month or 3 months by 3 months. So that way the employers can dismiss them at any moment without any compensation, without the least job guarantee. And recently, Rouhani's government passed a law making this much easier for the employers to go through this gambit, and the Council of Guardians just approved this. According to a key official of the Iranian regime, the Iranian industrial units work with 40% of their capacity. Actually, only 40% of the industrial units of Iran are now functioning, and the others have basically run out of business. So this is the overall general situation of Iranian economy, and one can go on and on about the figures and how despicable and deplorable the situation is. Now, what explains for all of this? Why we have come to where we are today? One is regime's policies. Where does the overwhelming majority of the Iranian people's capital and fortune goes? Number one, suppression. The top priority for the regime in terms of its budgeting is suppression. Despite the fact that this Rouhani administration claims it has a lot of economic problems, which it does, just on April 25, he said while he might not have given the budget allocated for some ministries here and there, he said when it came to security forces and police, he not only gave them 100% of their budget, but in some cases he even gave more. It's also very telling to note that in the budget for this current year, which began in March 2015, the budget for suppressive forces increased 53%. Actually, one area that the Iranian regime has spent enormous amount of money and is not taking any reduction is suppression and suppressive forces. Now, number two issue is huge amount of money and wealth which is spent for meddling in other countries, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq. in Yemen, not to mention other countries. According to the UN Special Representative for Syria, very recently in a private meeting, he said Iran spends $35 billion annually in Syria. $35 billion annually in Syria alone. And this was reported by the American press. This is a huge amount of money to be spent. And this is only in Syria. If one adds up what's spent in supporting the Houthis in Yemen, continuous a huge budget allocated for Hezbollah, the amount of money that they spent to finance and train and organize Shiite militias in Iraq, in addition to other countries, one gets a sense of the extent of the budget that's allocated for this pillar. Now, when it comes to the issue of the nuclear weapons program and the regime's drive to acquire nuclear weapons, according to some estimates, the Iranian regime has spent $300 billion on this project alone. Every day there are news of one corruption case here, one corruption there, and in some cases the amounts are simply astronomical. The Minister of Interior of Rouhani administration, just on April 26, made some very, very revealing figures in one of his remarks. He said 3,000 companies registered with one address. He said 4,000 companies had the same registration code. Now, who can do that unless they are related to the regime and they have the protection of the top brass of the regime? According to a news story just last year, the foundation that is controlled by Khamenei controls somewhere like $95 billion. Think for a second. $95 billion is only one entity that belongs to Khamenei and his office. And this is not an isolated case. So in that sense, one gets a sense that to what extent corruption has become pervasive and has become rampant. Now this, plus the regime's policies, very much explains the misery and devastation that the Iranian people in general and workers and laborers face today. Now, what has been the reaction of the Iranian population? That's why we are witnessing a marked increase in number of protests, strikes, and sit-ins against the regime in the last few years, particularly since last year. According to the a statement issued by Secretariat of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Madam Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the Iranian resistance, stated today that there has been 1,300 strikes, protests, and sit-ins in Iran since last year, and that's average of more than 110 a month. Just last April, which just finished yesterday, there were at least 250 cases of protests, strikes, and sit-ins registered throughout the country, and that's a very, very conservative estimate. The month before that, in March, there were 125 similar cases registered. On April 16th, there were protests by the teachers in 128 cities in 30 out of the 31 provinces. And one has to keep in mind that teachers constitute a big working force in Iran. We are talking about somewhere like 1 million teachers in Iran. And to that effect, they have called for 1 week of protest beginning today, and the crescendo is announced to reach on May the 6th. So that explains why we are seeing a constant surge, an increase in protests, strikes, and sit-ins by the Iranian people, and by particularly with workers and as laborers, who see less and less hope for improvement in their situation, who feel that as time goes by, their situation is getting worse, there is no prospect in sight, and all of their protests and strikes very quickly turn political, because their demands very much gets intertwined with their political demands, and goes to the heart of the regime and the way it functions. Naturally, the ultimate solution to their misery, to their difficult situation, is a regime change. So far as this regime is in power, as I mentioned, suppression, meddling in other countries, and drive to acquire nuclear weapons are not going to go away, despite huge income that this regime has had, despite the fact that this regime has had huge revenues because of the very high oil prices until 2 years ago. The Iranian people have not seen the benefit, rather the regime has either plundered their wealth or it has expended for its survival. So allow me to finish by saying that the only prospect for improvement in the welfare and situation of the Iranian workers and teachers is the regime change by the Iranian people and the organized resistance. And until that happens, no matter what happens, one cannot see a long-term improvement in the welfare and economy of the Iranian people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gobadi. We have some questions that we would like to ask you. The first question is, since Rouhani has taken office, has there been any changes regarding the situation of workers in Iran?
Yes, it has got only worse. As I mentioned, there has not been any improvement whatsoever. Rather, the situation is deteriorating rather quickly. And that explains why we are seeing this surge in number of protests, strikes, sit-ins. And one thing else which I like to emphasize is that geographically these protests are becoming much more widespread. They are not limited to one section of the country or one particular geographical area, which clearly means that the regime in its entirety is in trouble. People are making their demands heard, and the regime's repressive measures is not making subdued, and the people are marching on and asking for their rights. So not only there has not been any improvement, rather quite contrary, there has been a very, very rapid deterioration of the welfare of the Iranian workers.
The question may be, the same question, but this one asks, what steps Rouhani has been taken to improve Iranian workers' situation?
He has not taken any steps to improve their situation. He has taken steps to deteriorate their situation. Actually, when it comes to the main policies of the regime, Rouhani has very much continued the same path as his predecessors. Rouhani has been anything than continuing the same path. As I said, suppression is continuing even more vigorously. Even when it comes to budgetary matters, as I said, he increased the budget of suppressive forces and military apparatus and intelligence apparatus 53% for this year, this Persian year that just begun in March. For spending in countries like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, there has not been any respite. So far as it pertains to nuclear issue, the same. So there has not been any changes, except the fact that Rouhani has taken some steps to make life more difficult for the laborers. Actually, they just passed a legislation to make it easier for the for employers to dismiss the laborers, to give them even less, to deprive them more from their rights, and make their contracts even short-lived. This temporary contracts is something very important to notice. When workers have to work on month-to-month contracts or 3-month contracts, something like this, they simply do not qualify for Social Security. They cannot qualify for even the basic insurance. They are deprived of the most rudimentary rights of a worker. They're just simply working like day to day. And Rouhani just passed a law to this effect, which was ratified by the Council of Guardians. So you can see, despite all his rhetoric, Rouhani not only has not done anything to improve their situation, rather he's aggravating their problems.
The next question that we have received is, Has there been any changes in the demands and the slogans of workers and teachers in Iran lately?
Well, on the face of it, naturally in the beginning, it's for their basic needs, job security, wage increase, job protection, insurance. But very quickly, that turns political, and more often nowadays there are slogans like "free political prisoners," think of our rights, and give up Lebanon and Syria and things like this. So very quickly, what appears to be economic demands becomes political demands, and that's quite understandable. That's quite natural. Given the structure of this regime, people realize that the minute they ask for their demands, the only answer and response they see is suppression and regime's repressive attitude. So to that effect, very quickly their demands becomes political. So that's what we have witnessed, that they're becoming much more political and addressing the key and the core issues, and that is the regime in its entirety.
The question that is asked is, has there been more demonstration and protests under Rouhani? If so, what does explain for this?
Yes, as I mentioned, there has been more demonstrations and protest acts and sit-ins during the Rouhani's tenure. Given the dire economic situation and job situation that the workers and laborers face in Iran, that's quite natural, understandable. This has become more frequent, in some cases much more extensive, and much more persistent, given the fact that the Iranian economy is getting worse and worse, and the regime is trying to place the brunt of this on the lower level of the people in the society. That explains why you see much more extensive protests and strikes by the workers and laborers. This is very much reflective of the true situation in Iran. Iran is a powder cage. The regime has kept the lead on the people by suppression and by the policies I just mentioned. And as time goes by, simply people have had enough, and they stand up and they push back.
The next question that we have received is, what has been the response of the regime to growing protests and strikes by the workers and laborers?
Well, like any other attitude of the Iranian regime, more repression, more crackdowns, arrest of the laborers, intimidating them, basically sacking them, threatening them by that they will lose their jobs. So basically the same pattern by the regime that we have witnessed over the years has continued under Rouhani, and in some cases even more aggressive than before. So look, this regime either has to respond to people's demands and alleviate their concerns and their woes, or it will resort to more repression. Given the fact that this regime is incapable of and unable of responding to their legitimate demands, the only answer has been more and more repression and suppression.
Is there any relations between the Iranian regime's meddling in other countries and also the difficulties that Iranian workers are facing inside the country?
Naturally. A very big portion of the Iranian people's wealth and capital on a regular basis are allocated for the regime's egregious policies in the region. And we are not talking about a small amount of money here. As I mentioned, when it comes to Syria, Iranian regime spends like $35 billion to some estimates a year. That's a huge amount of money. Well, some estimates have talked about $2 billion a month. Even that will come up to somewhere like $25 billion a year, and that's only for Syria. Supporting all this, Shiite militias and their killings and their carnage in Iraq. You add to this the regime's consistent and persistent support for Hezbollah, the regime's support for the Houthis, and these are the more conspicuous cases. And as you know, the regime's involvement in Middle East goes far away throughout the whole Middle East, and their tentacles reach far away. So that takes a very huge bulk of the Iranian economy, and obviously the funds should come from somewhere, and it comes from the rights and the needs of the Iranian people. So they go very much hand in hand.
The next question is the situation of the workers in Iran result of international pressure, or there are other factors that contribute to this?
Well, this is the ploy or the line that the Iranian regime tries to depict. That look, they're victimized and they're under international pressure, and that explains why there's such a difficulties for the people and their stress. The reality is far from this. Let's review the facts, and facts are stubborn things. During the years 2005 to just a few months ago, the price of oil was somewhere like $100 a barrel, give and take, and Iran was selling a huge volume of oil, 2.3, 2.5 billion barrels of oil a day. The amount of the wealth and capital that Iran gained because of this astronomical figures is somewhere from $700 billion to $1 trillion in the course of that period. The question is, where did all that money go? Where was it invested? What kind of a job production it created? What kind of new industries were set up? So the reality is the Iranian regime is trying to find an scapegoat that explains for its ill-fated policies, for its mismanagement, for its corruption, for plundering the Iranian people's capital and wealth. The international situation, even if that's a factor, again, is a result of the policies and conduct of this regime. Actually, the appeasement policy of the West has been too soft on this regime, and the regime has always got away with its egregious policies and conduct, and the regime has got the best out of it. Even if one brings the factors this in, that doesn't explain the extent and the scope and the magnitude of the problem and the stress and pressure that the Iranian people are going through on a day-to-day life.
Do you see any prospect for improvement of the conditions of Iranian workers?
Under this regime, absolutely not. As I said, since 2005 until now, they have lost 73% of their purchasing power. And these are the period that Iran, as I said, used to sell huge amount of oil with a very high prices. So, look, the issue is very fundamental. For the last 37 years that this regime has been in power, it has simply plundered the Iranian people's capital. It has sold, the Iranian people's, all sorts of goods and resources, and have given it away just to keep themselves in power. And through their destructive policies and through their belligerence and warmongering policies. So far as this regime is in power, there is no way one can see a major change for the welfare of the Iranian people. This is delusional.
Some content that miserable situation of workers is due to sanctions or low prices. What is your view on that?
I think I addressed that issue, but allow me to repeat. The oil prices have gone down recently, but these problems are very profound. As I said, according to some of the regime's own figures, very, very few jobs were created in the last 10 years, and that's why somewhere like 1.2 to 1.3 million people join the workforce every year. Iran was selling, 2.3, 2.2, 2.1 million barrels on oil, exporting actually, every year until sanctions, and the sanctions just very recent. So the big question is, what happened all those years? Where did all the money go to? What kind of investments Iran did over these years? What kind of job creating industries were set up? So these are basically, I think, excuses and gambits that the Iranian regime is creating to evade the key question, to be responsible and accountable the woes and the troubles that the Iranian laborers and workers are facing today. The core issue is this regime, its policies, and its strategic direction. And that's not what only the Iranian resistance says. Nowadays, more and more people are coming to realization, understanding. Even some of the regime's own, people have started to bickering that what we are cultivating today, what we are witnessing today, is a direct consequence of what the regime has done in the past years. So I think the issue is much more profound, and that's why all these short-term solutions are futile.
Yes. Do you think any way Iranian economic structure can be reformed?
Well, if this regime can be reformed, its economic structure can also be reformed. Reform within this regime is absolutely a mirage. It's a dichotomy. This regime cannot be reformed. It does not have the capability to reform. The minute the regime steps toward any meaningful, substantial reform, that's tantamount to the regime unraveling. And the mullahs, and particularly the Supreme Leader Khamenei, knows this full well. So, and in a country like Iran, the political structure and the economic structure are very much intertwined. Allow me to elaborate. What is the biggest economic entity in Iran today? Everybody knows it's Revolutionary Guards. They are the ones who get the biggest contracts. They are the ones that have the most capital these days. They are the ones who enjoy an enormous amount of resources at their disposal. Simply, no major contract can be signed with direct or indirect involvement of Revolutionary Guards. It's a known fact that they control vast amounts of the Iranian economy. They have their own ports for import and exports, their own, they are the main shareholder of the Iranian major telecommunication company. They are also reaching out to the Iranian mines and trying to control Iranian mines. All the major roads are built by the Revolutionary Guards, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So, in that sense, if one wants to change the Iranian economy, they have to change the way the Revolutionary Guards conduct. And if you want to change the way Revolutionary Guards conduct, you are talking about a very, very major change in the regime. So you can see these are very much intertwined like a web. And there's no way they can be separated and distinguished from each other. This is simply a mirage.
And our last question is, what kind of solution can end the current misery of the Iranian workers?
I think the Iranian workers know better than anyone else that the only ultimate solution is the regime change, the overthrow of this regime by the Iranian people and the organized resistance. They know better than anyone else that as time goes by, their situation is getting worse. What is the story about all these young people who have to sell their kidneys to survive? As I said, some of the figures are very, very telling. 42% of university graduates are unemployed. These are huge numbers. The regime officials a lot of times warn about the army of the unemployed, the army of the hungry. As I said, 90% of the people live below the poverty line. So in that situation, they realize that there is no hope for improvement, for just the basic minimum rights under this regime. So that's why they realize the ultimate solution is the regime change. And the regime understands that fully, that how much grievances the Iranian people have, that how explosive the situation is. And that's why you see this continuous rise in the executions, public hangings, because that's the only way that the regime can keep itself in power. So the regime cannot retrieve from its suppression. It cannot improve people's welfare. They go hand in hand. So at the end of the day, Iranian economy, like the welfare of the Iranian workers, like other aspects of the Iranian life, will only change in a meaningful way when this regime is overthrown.
Thank you again, Mr. Gobadi, for attending our briefing for today.
Thank you very much, and I wish you a very, very happy day and a very bright, and happy weekend.